Good afternoon again to everyone. Thank you so much, Legal Era, for having me here. It's a privilege to be here on this panel in this Insolvency Summit 2021. And just to inform, Ishwar could not make it to this panel at the last minute because of some exigency. But I'm delighted to have this panel here with a very wide set of experience and skill sets here across. So thank you so much, Avinash, Rahul, Veena, and Anjali for joining me here. Just getting on to the topic on the way forward for stressed assets resolution in India. Our context is unique. We've had a buildup of NPAs to the extent of 12% nearly by 2017 over a period of time. It's snowballing into now a well-known crisis impacting corporates, of course, but also the banks and NBFCs, creating a logjam on economic growth. The IBC was enacted and implemented with unprecedented vigor. The NPAs of SCBs, or scheduled commercial banks, came down to 7.48% by March 2021. But the pandemic has hit hard and continues to threaten economic growth and induce stress in the system. As per the RBI report, the Financial Stability Report of July 2021, the NPAs are estimated to grow to anywhere between 9.8% to 11.22% by March 2022. And this is only NPAs. The stress could be even higher than that. Meanwhile, the stress resolution ecosystem, and on the one hand, the stress is obviously increased because of past stress as well as the pandemic, but the stress resolution ecosystem has faced a few challenges as well. There has been a lack of effective, I would say, pre-insolvency workout mechanism. A bilateral workout mechanism which works effectively on the ground has been lacking for the last few years, which has led to all roads leading to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, putting immense amount of pressure on the IBC infrastructure. There has been erosion of value because of the uncertainties ensuing, because of the delays around it and the disruption. And consequently, despite having a lot of private capital allocated for stress and distress in India, these have not been put to work as much as we would have wanted to kind of resolve the stress in the system. Of late, over the last year and a half, even before, and in particular by the Standing Committee on Finance report of the Parliament, there has been a lot of fire and censure on the IBCs, primarily owing to the delays, the value deterioration, etc. So with this background, I think there's been a dire need to solve the stressed asset situation. Banks and NBFCs balance sheets, banks probably thought they've provided enough as far as the pre-pandemic stress is concerned, but I think the pandemic stress may put pressure on bank balance sheets as well, while the NBFC balance sheets are pretty much, I think they've taken a hit post the 2018 crisis. So it's important to have a more sustained and effective stressed assets resolution framework going forward to get economic growth back on track. Now, how do we do that? First of all, what is the extent of stress that we're dealing with, which we're trying to resolve? The IBC being a pretty strong tool and a catalyst until now, but how do we strengthen the IBC further while the IBC stands? What are the alternatives to IBC, and how can we expand the solutions available and make them effective on the ground? And how can we better attract private institutional capital and put it to work for this resolutions? And these are the topics that we will discuss today on this panel and seek the views of the esteemed panel on this. So without further ado, let me get to the first question. I think it's about what are we trying to deal with in terms of, so maybe Rahul, if I can start with you. What is the extent of stress we are talking about, which is kind of dragging us, and especially post pandemic, and how do you see that as a whole?
Hey, thanks for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak at this esteemed summit. I was just listening to the previous session ending in terms of the cross border, and some of the topics that were being discussed were quite good. So in this context, to monitor this point about what is the extent of stress, the whole arena here has to be looked at in two parts. One is the pre-pandemic era, and the one is the post-pandemic era. When you talk about the pre-pandemic era, I think various balance sheets of banks, as we aggregate, there were two types of stressed assets. One which were out there in the open within the NCLT framework, and the second which were still being worked through the various banks and had not reached a stressed asset framework like an NCLT or certain other. And I would think that in that, a major chunk of the assets that existed had been either provided for and therefore brought to the respective resolution forums. Resolution of those is another matter, but those were brought. I think post pandemic, what has happened is that this number is now going to get amplified on account of the various compensation, various deferments, various dispensation that were given because of the pandemic. And there are, Avinash can talk about it. You have a certain, I'm sure, a number in percent, but the numbers are ranging, anywhere from 9% upwards in terms of the entire financial systems, banking, stressed assets. I think what is important is the way forward has to be that, we have to find a way to also let the institutions be able to identify, close these situations, either through their own resolutions or bring it to the fold of the various, asset reconstruction, bodies. I'm not going to use the word bad bank or stressed asset bank, but whichever body is the best way to move forward. I think identification, putting a date to saying now if it is stressed, it has to be recognized. It can't be deferred for being recognized. And to me, once we put that framework in place, which part of it with the announcement of the agencies in place and a transfer mechanism is in place, I think the resolution will become that much easier. I think just putting a number today without having a deadline for transfer and an implementation of the process forward becomes a bit challenging in my view.
Thank you. Interesting point you made of the stress is function of the timeline. Obviously, if the timelines are extended, the stress may also get amplified. So, Avinash, sir, given your extensive role as a lender before you chose to cross the line and become an investor, what's your view on what are we talking about in terms of what are we trying to resolve?
Yeah, I think great to be with all of you guys, Rahul, Anjali, and Veena, and of course Dinkar. See, the stress, last 5 years we have been talking about it, and this number keep on shifting. Fact remains there's a very large portion here. So if you go by RBI's own data, they themselves are saying 8 lakh crores plus in NPLs itself. So that works out to more than 100 billion. Add to it the companies which are called, as per RBI definition, called special mentions accounts, special mention account or restructured accounts. And add to it the write-offs which don't appear in the bank balance sheet as advance. So if you put all of this together, it could easily be in the range of about 150 to 170 billion. There are various numbers out there, but the fact remains that it's a very large pool that we are talking about. Of late, I think last 3-4 years, what has happened is earlier the stress means it always meant very large accounts, very large accounts, and that is what probably everybody's focus went there. Not that time there were no stress in smaller assets, but because there are larger assets, the more focus, more attention, more headlines were grabbed by these larger assets. Now what has happened is most of the larger assets are either resolved or in the verge of resolving, or there is no solution, whatever. And in addition, what has happened is since 2015-16, I think there have been no larger loans from the banks, as far as I understand. Even if they are more to the AAA rated borrowers or government borrowers, etc. So there is no accretion in this larger account shifting to NPLs. There is no loans only for last 5-6 years to this. There was no capital cycle pickup because the economy was not doing well. add to it, this disease came up, this corona and related issues. So now I think going forward, there are more SMEs, smaller assets, service providers, etc., whose accounts going to be bad, and the addressing that is opportunity there for distressed players like us, ARC, and all. And that is where I think most of the solution will be sought going forward. That is what I think. There are, of course, there will be some larger accounts which will fall here and there. Some NBFCs themselves have not done well. There could be some stress in NBFCs also. So all those things will come up. So I think what we are looking for is what we are looking at this point in time as a distress, players is very large pool which will be diversified all over, and it will also be quite a lot of them will be more of an enforcement type of situations than the complete turnaround or those type of situations which we were talking about a few years back.
So thanks. So yeah. So thank you. I think the important point I would amplify there is that I think the larger cases are kind of addressed or can't much be done about it. But now we're facing a huge volume of mid to smaller cases which need to be resolved as well. So before moving on to the next question, can I request the team to play a short video, just a 1-minute video on IBC before we move to the topic? So just a little few statistics around IBC, if you can play the video. There have been a lot of views recently on the effectiveness of IBC, as I said. Delays, value erosion. The report of the standing committee has been critical. Thank you for bearing just with that analysis. But I think clearly there has been a huge mindset shift owing to the IBC that control can shift to the lenders if things don't go right and there is a default that happens. And that's probably the biggest positive that can happen, apart from change of ownerships, recoveries going up from 26% to 35-36% for FCs. The timelines going down from 4.5 years to 1.5 years. So various aspects are there, but at the same time, there are out of 4,500 cases, nearly 1,600 are pending. 75% are delayed beyond 270 days. The NCLT bandwidth is a big question that is being debated. Various remarks in the report from the Parliamentary Standing Committee on lender decision making in liquidation, prompting a COC court to come in, changes in the amendments in the Act, adherence to process versus value maximization, benchmarks for haircuts. So with all of this debate, I would just bring in Veena here first. What's your view on the impact on IBC, and more importantly, how do we? A strong implementable IBC is important for any other resolution mechanism to work. So how can it?
Sure.
And before Veena starts,
Thanks.
so welcome to Ishwar as well onto the panel. Sorry, go ahead, Veena.
Yeah. No, thanks, Tinker, and thanks to my co-panelists and Legal Era for having me here. I think IBC as a legislation has been, in the news every day. You open the paper, and in the last 5 years, I think one can probably count the number of times they have not seen the word NPA or stress or IBC, right? Like even my 10-year-old nephew understands what IBC is, or at least has heard of the word IBC and wonders what is it that you're doing every time, it is a law which has been very, very proactive as far as the regulator is concerned. It has seen maximum changes. I think the so-called 5-year itch has also now come to a closure, which is globally seen as the time period for any stressed asset related legislation to settle down and kind of have a very, very good impact. I think some of the key changes for IBC to be strengthened, at least from what I would see, is firstly promoter discipline. At the end of the day, most of the accounts that we see in India are very highly promoter driven, and the solution to that cannot be that the promoters just won't give guarantee anymore. That's not the solution that we are looking for, especially after the regime for personal guarantees being opened under IBC. I think the promoter discipline is one aspect where I think IBC certainly needs to be strengthened a little bit more. While a lot has been done in terms of just getting the promoter into insolvency, but that's not a solution by itself. You need to strengthen the regulation where people are putting money where they put the paper to, right? If you have put something on the paper, I mean, breach of financial covenants, for example, is taken so lightly in the Indian system. It's just not acceptable. So I think that's one thing. The other thing, and I think RBI is doing some good work, especially in this place, is with what they called as EWS, early warning signs. They are, I think this is where the lenders need to also look out and strengthen their framework and their processes to actually identify this stress at an early stage itself. I think in terms of anything else that can be done to actually strengthen this sector, I would think that like IBC is now a buzzword, right? People are aware of what it is and stuff like that. People are interested. Whether you go anywhere and any distressed asset player is interested, they would want to look at the assets. And I mean, as lawyers and as practitioners, you would have also seen Dinkar, where people are just interested to know what is happening. They may submit an EOI not for the purpose of investment, but to actually see what is this, and what is it that if I'm interested tomorrow in any other asset, let me at least understand what the process is. I think from that perspective, the time is right. Especially as far as foreign distressed funds are concerned. The general participation route has been through the ARCs. I'm not saying that the ARCs are no longer required or anything. I'm saying that should the means and ways by which an ARC resolution can take place, the benefits that are given under IBC should extend to an ARC resolution also completely, which strengthens the ARCs. And in parallel, having the framework which strengthens participations by FPIs, AIFs, and others directly in this space will also bring about changes which will strengthen the entire IBC framework. I think some of these changes are in the way. We saw some amendments a couple of weeks ago from the RBI in terms of changing the norms for sale of loans. The entire SARFACI is being rewritten by the working group, and if these changes are actually implemented, we would hopefully see less of IBC in news, because probably things are getting more successful. Thanks.
Absolutely, I think. Thank you, Veena. Anjali, anything from your perspective on how do we make the IBC stronger?
Thank you so much for having me here. since you have played a very beautiful video wherein you have talked about the numbers and all that stuff. So the numbers do not really present definitely a rosy picture of IBC, but everything that matters cannot be really measured. This is what I feel. So, and everything that is measured does not always necessarily matters. The systematic gains that the code has brought in relation to the induced resolutions outside the code, or the behavioral changes, or the increased availability of credit. I think all these cultural changes you definitely need to look into it, just to ensure that IBC is definitely a game changer and an enabler. And I'm sure my co-panelists, Mr. Ishwar and Mr. Avinash, would agree to it, that the kind of distressed space that India is providing, distressed asset space that India is providing to foreign investors, that is bringing foreign capital influx in huge numbers, like I think this Kotak funds and resurgent funds. I think we have got good number of commitments, received good commitments from Abu Dhabi Investment Airport Authority and CPPIB. So I think this is, and IBC is definitely playing a big role. That is why we are attracting foreign investments for the same. And talking about the report specifically, definitely there are positive impacts, as you have already mentioned, about the code of conduct or the OCs, I think the plight of OCs or the home buyers. But there are three things in the report specifically that I found that needs a litmus test, or that needs a review. Firstly is in relation to the setting up of the benchmark for the quantum of haircut that the banks can take. Because that has to be decided on a case-to-case basis. You cannot have a standard comparable like global standards for the same. Second is in relation to the setting up of a centralized insolvency professional institution for the regulating the conduct of RPs. And I would definitely want Mr. Dinkar to share his thoughts on the same. And thirdly is in relation to the disposing of assets across multiple bidders. I think that may destroy the time-bound resolution value of the code itself. And if we want to strengthen the IBC as such, I think we need to work upon the core legal framework. For that, definitely we need to work upon the NCLT infrastructure, setting up specialized benches for MSMEs or IBC would work. Or we can also offer pre-litigation mediation or discussion, just like we have in Commercial Courts Act. I think even that is the way that we can avoid the triggering of insolvency. And secondly is I would really want that the plight of OCs, the operational creditors, need to be considered, so that we can have the equality in the interest of all stakeholders, including OCs and the shareholders. For that, I think we can have representatives of OCs, or we can give them tax benefits or GST waivers or whatsoever. But I think they need to be considered, because they often found themselves in a flux whenever the state of insolvency exists. So
thank you. I think the NCLT bandwidth and coupled with the the cases, as Avinash had mentioned, is all going to be smaller and mid-market. I think that really presents a big bottleneck. And what you said is interesting around mediation. So if mediation can be used to avoid choking the NCLT bandwidth for admissions and for maybe OC disputes, then I think we may. That's an idea that needs to be discussed further.
Right, definitely.
Avinash sir, from your perspective as a lender in the past and as an investor now, where do you see the IBC being becoming better from? Yes, obviously it has had some problems recently on timelines, but the fantastic framework that it is, how can we make that better in your view?
Yeah, no, so I think the framework and is really laudable, and I think both Veena and Anjali elaborated in. There are various people who will fully agree with, and more than that, that this is one of the best things that has happened in distress in this country. So absolutely no doubt about it. It is also heartening that government and all agencies have constantly worked on it. Like Veena mentioned, maximum number of amendments would have happened in this to this act than anything else. So probably people are agile, people are giving feedback, government is open to listening, and they're also able to bring in quite changes. But as it always happens in developing country and country like us, the devil lies in the execution here. So unless you execute the best of the law correctly, you are going to have this shortfalls or pitfalls in this. So I think the whole problem here, to my mind, seems to be implementation. Right from, we have NCLTs, but we don't have judges. We have people, but they are not competent. We have RPs, but against whom a lot of complaints are coming in. So the point is about how do you change it? as a lender or as an investor, IBC was never a first resource for us. It was the last one. If nothing happens, then only I wanted to go to IBC, even as a lender, even as investment person. So the point is, what is expected by me from IBC is it should be a credible threat to the borrower that if it doesn't behave, I will have a recourse. Now, best of the law, even if IBC is the best of the law, and if I'm not able to show that threat to him, if that fellow knows that 80% of the cases don't get resolved don't even get admitted in 80 days, then obviously I think he's not threatened as much as we would like him to be. So therefore, I think then you come to this individual insolvency. So, but that is not an option. Like it is, IBC has to work as an IBC for a corporate. I can always have a secondary recourse to his individual guarantee, but my main recourse has to be this. And somewhere this implementation in terms of NCLT, efficiencies have to improve. That I'm very sure. And I very much like this idea which Anjali mentioned about mediation. See, my thought, and I may be completely wrong because I'm not a fully legally educated person. IBC is part of overall legal system in this country. Okay, it's a legal framework and legal structure, legal courts and all. Now, in our country, legal system itself has having challenges. It is not one of the best. So the whatever flaws are there are likely to get reflected in the IBC also. It is not about IBC Act or NCLT. It is the whole system which is there, ecosystem, that gets reflected in. That is why slowing it down. Now, when we call it National Company Law Tribunal, it is a tribunal, right? So why can't we have this mediation system where it doesn't fall under legal purview at all? Let it be outside legal. Let Veena and Anjali be the arbitrators and decide the case. Why are they fighting against each other and standing in the court? If they have equal knowledge or if they are available to us as a recourse or as a resource, why can't we use these experts in the field of legal and commercial areas and then use them for arbitrations? And that arbitration should be valid. Why a court of NCLT has to be approved by PMO and all? I don't understand this. I can go for 1 crore dispute to NCLT, right? Mera in Bombay, 1 crore ka to makan ka price hota hai, and minimum housing is 1 crore. If I have some dispute there, I can go to NCLT, right? If I am just giving a raw example, but for smallest of the thing, I can go to NCLT. But the person who is deciding this 1 crore dispute is appointed by PMO. Now, what sort of somehow there is a disconnect there. That's what I am trying to say. I have taken too long a time to explain my point. But I think somewhere it has to get out of this judicial system which our country is having, and it has to be slightly maybe Companies Act or company law or whatever it comes under. It has to be outside the purview of this legal framework. That's what I feel.
No, I think that's a fair point. At the end of the day, we are trying to resolve a commercial issue, and a commercial issue is best resolved commercially with the credible threat of a law that can be implemented well, as you said. I mean, but it's best resolved commercially than as a last resort by the legal process. Ishwar, any comment on IBC before we move on to the alternatives to IBC?
Yeah, Dinkar. So I've heard all the comments. I am in conformity with all the points that my fellow panelists have mentioned. Dinkar, as I think after 5 years of the IBC coming into force, I think the single largest factor which has caused so much of delay, and I'm being a little radical over here, has been the introduction of 29A. And I think time has come when 29A needs to be scrapped. I know this is a pretty radical suggestion that I'm making, but I think it served its purpose. And it was meant essentially for some large-scale NPLs in the system, which have since been resolved. And currently, I think it is doing more harm than good. Because I'll tell you what it's doing. It's delaying all the smaller resolutions. It will come in the way of any pre-packs that we want to bring in. It is, in any case, diluted to a large extent through the introduction of 12A. So why do you, need to have a 29A in place in the first place right now? let everybody bid. Unless, of course, he is a willful defaulter or a fraud or something like that. I mean, then in which case he will be debarred in any case, and the COC is not going to bid for him. If you see, all the crux of all the delays is essentially the erstwhile promoter trying to block the plan. Let's be practical about this, and that's the truth, right? Because his company has been taken away from him, because he is not allowed to participate, he comes through some other form and he litigates, and then that entire process is getting delayed. Allow him to come. In the COC, the Supreme Court has given COC such kind of sweeping powers that the COC sees through this and does not vote for his plan. At least you will have a resolution, number one. Number two is the small cases, which are all going into liquidation. I think the last savior for these companies is the erstwhile promoter himself. So what's the point in debarring him from coming in? And finally, my point is that this 29A, first of all, doesn't exist in any other jurisdiction. It is completely Indian, made in India. We don't see this anywhere else. And it has actually killed entrepreneurship in areas, in jurisdictions where something similar is prevalent. You will stop entrepreneurship. When I, as an individual, want to become an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurship is not so easy in a country. We think that we take it for granted that you can build entrepreneurs and they grow on trees. No, they do not grow on trees. So it takes a different mindset. And there is no entrepreneur in the world, no matter how successful he is now, who has in his first venture hit jackpot. So he will have failures also. So you have to allow these guys to fail so that when they build and come out with their ideas in round 2, round 3, or round 4, you don't, blacklist him already and cast aspersions on his moral values. And 29A exactly does that. It has already said ki ye to chor hai. And you will kill entrepreneurship. So as a country also, I'm concerned. And I think it served its purpose, if at all there was a purpose. And about time you got rid of it. It will probably resolve a lot of our, bottlenecks and things which are happening. And the delays will come down. And in any case, the COC has the power to whether to vote for his scheme. If they feel that he's good enough to come back, they will vote for his scheme. If they don't feel he's good enough to run the show, they will vote against his scheme.
Yeah, I think
that's my 2 bits on this.
Yeah, no, I think that's a lot of people will argue against that issue that 29A is a holy cow, is the edifice of IBC. But also, I think if we go back and scratch the surface a bit, the BLRC says that the whole purpose of this is to allow businesses to build back. And if there is a genuine business failure, then allow it to come back. So put that filter of malafide there. And if that filter of malafide is passed, then why not? So, yeah, I mean, I think especially if you're getting down to smaller and mid-market where there won't be enough professional management bandwidth to run these with the help of private capital, then where do you go? So, yeah, absolutely. Rahul, since this has been a very intensely debated topic around the IBC, any last views with you before we move to alternatives?
I think I tend to agree with what Ishwar is saying, and also, the framework point of view. I think, if you look at it from an NCLT perspective, it's supposed to be the last resort. It's not supposed to be the first resort in itself. And when you burden the system with the way it has been, I think the whole thing starts sort of chugging along in a wrong direction. And I think a very good law or a regulation, because of trying to address certain nuances, as I think Ishwar mentioned, made in India, you're plugging some holes, you've overcomplicated certain things. To me, a level playing field which allows a free market to operate here, which is the intention of this law, should be allowed to play. And I think there are 2 other aspects which I feel is causing some delay. I think the state asset decision making around, how do they move? Do we need separate permits? Do we need separate approvals? A lot of arbitrage sits at that point of time because it creates uncertainty in the minds of a new buyer. And I think the third point, which hopefully, the new framework around stressed asset bank resolves is, I think we have had too much of fragmented ownership of distressed paper in the country. And that has created an arbitrage between various players to just, keep chugging along and delaying the tactics. And if we find a way to put that in one single framework, and the law recognizes that, once it's moved to a third party, it's no longer, individuals are not going to be held accountable for taking the decision to recognize the stress and, provide for it, then the process becomes smooth. So it's to me, these 2-3 things also need to be embellished along with what I think Ishwar is saying.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Rahul. Moving on, I think IBC needs to be strong. Absolutely agreed, but it can't be the first or the only resort. So if that's the case, then what are the other resorts that can be got to? How do you resolve a commercial problem commercially? What are the alternatives which the lenders, the businesses, and potential investors who are bringing in new money can take to? I mean, we know the options, but how do we make them work effectively? I mean, there is the June 7 circular that we have. There are OTSs that can happen. We are talking about prepacks for obviously MSMEs is there, but prepacks for other corporates also being talked about with I don't know, with or without 29A. We'll have to wait and watch. And if we can get the so-called bad bank in there, then we can drive lender consensus and easier decision making around that, as Rahul said. But then how do we, I mean, with so many years of RBI schemes being in there, they're still not really working there, and lender consensus is probably the biggest problem in there, apart from valuation mismatches between lenders and promoters. So Ishwar, how do we make these alternatives work on the ground and prevent everything from flowing into IBC? First up,
say Dinkar, my view is as follows. This is a commercial problem to start with, and the commercial problem needs to be resolved within the fraternity of the lenders and the other stakeholders and the company. That should be the first resort, and all the RBI schemes have been directed towards that. And today, if you ask any banker, he is scared of the IBC. He's scared of sending a company into the IBC because he knows that it is going to kill value. It is just going to procrastinate and delay the entire resolution process. And obviously, value maximization, which is supposed to be the purpose, never gets satisfied. So if that be the case, then you just take a leaf out of that and frame your, pre-pack solutions, which again, we have seen in certain cases that the process sanctity has not been maintained. And hence, if you have a good and robust pre-pack regime, you can find resolutions within these, stakeholders very conveniently. And that will be, the fastest, best for the company. And in terms of value maximization, I'm sure it will get you the best. And as Rahul has mentioned, that there is always the threat of the IBC that if we guys don't resolve this asset, then it goes into the IBC, which kills more value. And hence use the IBC only as a measure of last resort rather than the measure of first resort. So I am a great advocator of having the pre-packs come into force for large corporates sooner rather than later. You make the rules. You have the NCLT where you can go and bless this entire process and give sanctity to the process as well. I think that's very important, that the process needs to be adhered to, and may the highest bidder win and bid.
Thanks. Veena, anything on prepacks and your views on that? Just a quick reaction from you.
I think, very, very briefly, I think it's delayed. It should have come quite some time ago. Everybody spoke about the top 12. Everybody spoke about the top 40 cases after that. Ideally, we should have seen prepacks come in right after that, because, at the time when 29A was introduced was probably the time to introduce prepacks as a law itself. It's according to me, it's already delayed. Bringing it in for MSMEs, just the regime, right? Like IBC as a regime is an expensive regime. You need advisors, you need lawyers, you need other people on the ground to take control. MSME is not, it's not going to be successful for MSME because it's not a viable option for MSMEs to go through and spend that kind of money. So according to me, as far as pre-packs are concerned, it's high time that it comes in. I actually am an advocate. I mean, being a lawyer and otherwise a professional, I think I agree with Ishwar to a great extent in the context of 29A and as to whether it has outlived what it intended to achieve. Because if you have a promoter who is, for example, a willful defaulter, the COC is never going to vote for the person because the entity will never be able to take money from the market ever again. So there are other bells and whistles in place already. So insofar as alternatives to IBC is concerned, I think one of the key things that is required, which is sort of digressing from what we have been discussing, is strengthening the resolution framework for entities in the regulated sector. Whether it is a bank, we saw LVB, we saw Yes Bank some time back, and we saw a range of NBFCs which are seeing so much stress, right? So if you have a regime which strengthens the resolution of stress amongst entities in which people otherwise repose their faith and their trust, that would automatically bring in some amount of streamlining into the credit history of the entire system itself. So I think that's also something where insofar as alternatives to IBC is concerned, those are three things which I think needs to be parallelly strengthened so that this becomes more of a meaningful resolution. I mean, people tend to forget that IBC is not recovery, right? The idea has always been resolution. But any data that you see will first tell you how much did you recover from the IBC. So which goes against the entire principle of why IBC came in itself. So I think I would add to that from that perspective.
Great point. I think the regulation of financial sector or regulated entities, coupled with the point you earlier made around better early warning systems for banks and from an RBI standpoint, and acting on those early warning systems, because
yes.
No offense to banks, but a lot of banks say, I can't recognize any stress until I have enough provisions against that. Until then, don't come to me. Don't even tell me there is any stress until I've provided enough for it on my.
So that's the thing, right? I mean, Dinkar, when we look at how is it that a banker looks at it, if it is going to hurt the banker, it is going to not have a positive impact. It has to be looked at it from the perspective of how is it going to hurt the borrower, which is why the willful default regime works quite well, right? I mean, the process to declare somebody as a willful defaulter is obviously painful, but once you go through that process, things are fairly streamlined and you're actually punishing the person who's a defaulter.
Yeah, absolutely. Rahul, your views on alternatives? How do we make something else there so that IBC is the last resort and not the first resort?
I think you have laid down the list of things. I think there is no other nirvana that will come. It's, in my view, the process has to be driven with full umbrage given to the bankers as well, in terms of a commercially defined process where if a decision is made, I think I completely agree with what Ishwar is saying, and to an extent what Veena was saying about how it has to be seen as a deterrent. But one of the things that, given that we have a large establishment of nationalized banks, there's always this point about, does the onus lie to me and what will be my accountability? I think there, somehow IBC and CLT provision came in and it brought in the perspective, okay, you know what, everything's going to get washed through this. So, it's not my problem. I think one aspect of that also has to be looked into as we resolve this. And, the whole idea of trying to combine the entire stressed asset universe into one single, and whether it is an OTS, whether it is a a process which goes through some form of an auction or some form of sale. And if nothing else works, to me, NCLT is always meant to be a situation where nothing else has happened. So you find potentially a way to resolve a bankruptcy or a liquidation scenario. Unfortunately, we have done the reverse here. It's just gone in as a first resort, come out as a last thing. So to me, alternatives are not that difficult to ascertain. It's the process. And I would say last thing, good Anjali pointed that out. She talked about two international players who have put money through platforms in India. My biggest challenge that I see in this is today, we play a big role in this. We have been participating in a lot of transactions. We still can't participate directly. Now, to me, why should that playing field not change? I'm not, coming here and talking about, whether A should be allowed or not. I think time has come to access that foreign capital more efficiently, because if that capital cannot be accessed, efficiently and directly, you will always have inefficiencies, both in terms of cost and in terms of process.
Yeah, I think if we're probably having this panel a couple of weeks or down the line, we may have a potential solution to that, Rahul. But that brings us to the next topic, really around distressed investors, or people, special situation investors or alternative funds, whatever we call them. I think there's a lot of money that's been lined up for the market to be invested into stressed assets, into special situations, but not all of that money has been put into play. Probably one of the reasons is what you mentioned in terms of being not allowing a level playing field, but would be interested to know, because that's one of the big pieces of the puzzle that needs to be fixed. Would be interested to know from you all as to what needs to be done so that that money can come in more easily and put in and can help resolution and obviously everything else that follows. Maybe start with Ishwar, if that's okay.
Yes, Dinkar. When we set out with our mandate, we had broadly given a scope of 70% would be in distress and 30% would be in special sits. But the way things have panned out, and that is partly due to COVID, partly largely due to the time overruns in terms of resolving a non-performing loan distress situation, which could vary anywhere between 12 to 24 months. The reality on the ground is that I have 70% in special sits and probably 30% in distress. So that's the reality. And since we as a fund have timeline in terms of what is the investment period, and the LPs give us 3 or 4 years depending on the fund, we are more tilted towards doing transactions which are bilateral in nature, which essentially means outside the distress space, transactions where we are looking for acquisition funding, things that can consummate in the next, once you start a transaction, in any case, it takes a long time because these are large transactions. So the time horizon that we keep is, 4 to 6 months. So the first question that we ask is the deal live? Second, can it be consummated in the next 4 to 6 months? If not, just keep it on the back burner, let it cook. When it's ripe, it'll come, and then we'll invest time in that. So that seems to be the mantra right now for us as investors. And going forward, the opportunities will come more in special sits rather than in distress. Reason being that a large part of, apart from the timelines, of course, a large part of the resolvable distress situations have been resolved. So what's remaining right now are pretty, end of the barrel kind of situations, which I think liquidation seems to be the only hope for those companies. So in that context, yes, we are quite active in the market, but we look at more special sits rather than distress.
Or situations like power, which need resolution, but there are other aspects around it which
you have the ESG issue. So, so that's a different challenge altogether. So all the thermal power plants are stuck.
Yeah. So fair. So I can probably distill it down to more lender consensus when you say that when it cooks further, but then by that time, the flip side to that is the value or the recovery to everybody, all the stakeholders dips. So yeah, it comes back to a lack of lender consensus in these situations. So Rahul, any from any? I mean, I know you mentioned in terms of level playing field, but what can make things easier for money to come through?
I think two things. One, as I said, direct participation. Broadening the fact that even when you look at it today from an ARC's perspective, which front most of the transactions when it goes to a Swiss challenge or other secondary purchase sales, a large chunk of that money is coming through foreign funds, whether integral to that ARC or otherwise. Why have a restriction that it can only be done through a certain set? So to me, broadening that, and I think there have been a few recommendations that RBI is considering, and I think it should happen sooner the better in my view. And the second point to me, comes back to the same point. I think Ishwar's harped about it. Eventually, we are all driven by commercial, intent. And if the commercial intent is to, find a willing buyer, willing seller, I think there has to be an onus on both sides. A lot of times we've seen willing sellers also sometimes just dip into the market without having the pressure of recognizing that this has to now be recognized and therefore, resolved. A lot of times it's just an exercise to test the market. To me, that's the second bane of it. As the world opens up in the distressed market, distressed global players they're not wedded to India. They like the scale and size here, but they're not wedded to India. So when they see opportunities which come with ease and with better, transparency, then they move to those jurisdictions. So to me, I think that's also something that has to be. And again, I keep repeating, but hopefully the stressed asset bank does become a way to channel, because especially if it's going to be a larger mid-market, not marquee names that need to be resolved, that would be a better way to find asset values, quicker way to find asset values.
Yeah, and lender consensus can happen easily when there's one stretched assets bank. Avinash sir, any views on this topic before we can move on to the last bit?
No, I think in my view, there is no dearth of funds. I think most of the investors, whoever in the world, whoever is doing any distress anywhere is very keen here. There are no dearth of vehicles. So anybody and everybody who does it, all of them, basically there should be a good doable transaction. Now, doable transaction means there should be a bilateral transaction. There has to be a good business. Promoters should be willing to agree commercial terms, because most of the money which comes in requires higher returns, and that has to be accepted by both lenders and the customer, the borrowers. And of course, less dependent, like ESG has now become a big factor, so that has to be compliant with that. And as far as possible, list of the government sort of interventions or payments required from that type of list, support from governmental agencies, and also if those 3-4 things are done, then probably the transaction does happen. As I initially mentioned, probably the larger ones are done and dusted, and as Ishwar also mentioned, that whatever is left may not have a very viable solution for that. But therefore, the opportunity lies in special situations. But in that, we need this support from the lenders and the borrowers.
Interesting. Thank you. I think just before we close, can I ask all of you to just highlight one change that you think should happen to help get this stressed assets resolution framework better from where it is today? And we'll obviously the powers who can make this change happen are listening to us. So or we can convey it to them so that they listen to us. So maybe just one key change. So Veena, we start with you?
I think, in addition to obviously what we discussed during the course of the panel, I think purely from an academic perspective, I will say that the views that different NCLTs take just has to be streamlined, whether it means we train the judges or what it is. Pick any day and log into any NCLT hearing. You'll always find that one bad apple to spoil the entire established principles, right? Some judgment from somewhere, the lawyers will pick up and they'll just say that NCLT has ruled this, and the other NCLT judge will invariably say, okay, fine, let me hear it. The minute you produce something, there is no decision taken, and that goes against
I lost you there, Veena, but I think we get the point on
the
consistent.
entire principle of a time-bound. Correct.
No, absolutely, and maybe digitization is the answer to that. You get all of the orders, and it's available for everyone, and there is a research desk which gives that to the judge before things happen. But yeah, I think we need to travel there. Anjali, your
Absolutely.
The key change that I would like to experience in this particular field will be in relation to the grant of a window or moratorium period prior to the commencement of CIRP, wherein the honest promoters, they get some time to arrange for their alternative investments or restructuring funds. This is specifically I'm saying in relation to the SREI infrastructure fund. So the promoters have appealed to Bombay High Court for that matter of fact, and that has been passed. And I want that honest promoters, they need to get the solution to this can be the provisional admission and the applicability of moratorium from the date of provisional admission only, and the honest promoters, they be given some time so that they can arrange for alternative funds. So in this case they were saying that we are in talks with strategic investors, we can save our company, but all their appeals have been rejected. So I think we can have that kind of framework in place,
which can save time, which happens between filing and admission. You're saying you can have a deemed admission and something around that. Okay, perfect.
No, I'm talking after admission. Like once it is admitted, so we should time should be given to promoters that if he's in talks with some strategic investors, then he should be given time to save his company. So you can have a provisional moratorium for that matter of fact.
Understood. Avinash sir.
I think I'll go back to what I was saying, that these are all commercial disputes and have to be viewed commercially. You can't have a complete legal system and following entire legal process. I elaborated one more example is we have a case where promoter also, I have come across this case where promoters are happy, willing to get it admitted, but still the judgment took 2 months, and that to a 17-18 page judgment. I don't know what judgment 17 is required. So somewhere I think we have to streamline this process where we are able to do it more commercially and less legally.
At the end of the day, as I said, it's a commercial dispute, needs to be resolved commercially with the law backing it, not just entirely through that. And if that's possible, then something like it. Yeah. Rahul.
I think we've said every aspect of it. To me, I would go back and echo with what Veena and Avinash are saying. I think those are the 2 points to me that resonate well. And as we speak, in fact, I don't know whether you really meant the regulator talking about listening to our voice, because it just got an inbound from the central government or a central bank saying FPI participation directly. There's a panel coming weeks, so hopefully it gets implemented from that perspective as well. But yeah, no, that will be my other point.
So thanks, Rahul. Ishwar.
Yeah, I think the RBI with its latest circular has answered some of our concerns. That is a level playing field, allowing us also to buy debts directly. Though it is not so categoric, but I think the spirit seems to be to allow everyone to be able to buy debts. We need to now work out the modalities with SEBI, which we will be doing. I think with that, I would say that the regulator, that is RBI, seems to have done its bit. We need to now get our act together. And if you would ask me, one change which needs to come in quickly is pre-packs, because you need to take the load out of the NCLTs. Only the exceptional cases which can't get resolved or because of some other reasons need to go into the NCLT. It should be more an exception rather than a rule to take all cases into the NCLT process. It's a commercial dispute. It can best be resolved outside the courts. And I think we are all mature enough, all stakeholders are mature enough to be able to find the best solution for the company outside that.
Fascinating. I think it's just 2 minutes short of our allocated time. Thank you so much. ladies and gentlemen, I think I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. I'm sure people hearing it would have learned a few things as well. Really appreciate your time and efforts. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Legal Era.
Thank you so
Back to you,
much.
Dr. Ramna.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much.
Dinkar. Thank you,
Bye.
Dinkar.